Centuries ago, when the St. Edward's crown was used for coronations, the jewels were hired in. Nowadays, they are real.
For decades, many believed there was one royal line Queen Elizabeth would never cross. Yet, in 2023, the world watched as Camilla wore a crown beside King Charles. For some, it was history. For others, it was unthinkable. Because this was never just about jewels or ceremony. It was about loyalty, memory, and a future few imagined during the darkest years of royal scandal. But here is the question that still lingers. Did Queen Elizabeth truly envision this moment, or did the monarchy slowly drift toward an ending even she never intended? Behind the glittering coronation lies a story of heartbreak, resistance, and one crown that changed everything. A love story that shook the throne. Long before crowns became controversial, before coronations sparked debate across Britain, there was simply a young prince who fell in love with the wrong woman at the wrong time. That, at least, is how many royal historians have described it. Because decades before Camilla became queen, few inside royal circles believed she would ever occupy such a position. In fact, there was a time when the very idea would have seemed almost impossible. The story begins in the early 1970s. Prince Charles was still a young heir navigating the pressures that came with being the future king. Every aspect of his life was watched. Every friendship attracted attention. Even his personal relationships carried constitutional significance. For most people, choosing a partner is a private matter. For the heir to the British throne, it was something very different. Then Charles met Camilla Shand. Accounts differ on the details of their first meetings, as royal stories often do. But one tale has survived for decades. According to royal lore, Camilla jokingly told Charles that their ancestors had once been romantically linked. It was playful, slightly daring, and entirely unlike the careful formality that surrounded royal life. Charles reportedly found her refreshing. Those who knew him at the time often described a young man caught between duty and personal desire. He carried enormous expectations on his shoulders from an early age. The monarchy had endured wars, crises, and constitutional changes. One day, Charles would inherit that burden. Yet beneath the titles and ceremonies was a man searching for companionship like anyone else. Camilla offered something different. She seemed comfortable in her own skin. She enjoyed country life. She loved horses. She understood aristocratic circles, but did not appear overwhelmed by royal status. Most importantly, she treated Charles as Charles, not merely as the Prince of Wales. Friends noticed the connection almost immediately. There are moments in royal history that become turning points only in hindsight. At the time, few people could have predicted how significant this relationship would become. But years later, many would look back on those early days and wonder whether history had already begun changing course. Yet royal life has always operated by rules that are often unwritten, but deeply understood. In those years, expectations surrounding the future king were particularly strict. Tradition carried enormous weight, public image mattered, family approval mattered. The monarchy was not merely a family, it was an institution that represented continuity and national identity. Every major decision was measured against that reality. Timing, too, worked against them. Charles entered naval service, spending long periods away. Camilla's life moved in another direction. In the early 1970s, she married Andrew Parker Bowles, an Army officer with strong connections to royal circles. On paper, the story seemed finished. Lives had taken different paths. History appeared settled. But some stories refused to stay in the past. Over the following years, Charles remained one of the most watched bachelors in the world. The pressure to marry grew steadily. Newspapers speculated endlessly about possible brides. The public expected a royal wedding. The institution expected stability. And as time passed, the search for a suitable future princess became increasingly urgent. Then entered Lady Diana Spencer. Young, aristocratic, and widely admired, Diana quickly captured public attention. She was more than a royal fiancée. To many people, she seemed to embody a fairy tale. When Charles proposed, excitement spread far beyond Britain. The world watched with fascination. Their wedding in 1981 became one of the defining spectacles of the century. Crowds lined the streets, millions watched on television. St. Paul's Cathedral provided a breathtaking backdrop for what appeared to be the perfect royal story. Diana's dress became iconic almost overnight. The photographs traveled across the globe. From the outside, it looked like a dream. Inside the marriage, however, reality proved far more complicated. Even in those early years, rumors persisted that Charles had never fully left his past behind. Whispers circulated in royal circles. Journalists pursued leads. Friends remained careful with their words. Yet the speculation never entirely disappeared. As time passed, the cracks became harder to ignore. The pressure of royal life was immense. Diana struggled with the intense public scrutiny that came with her new role. Charles faced the demands of duty, tradition, and expectation. The marriage that had once symbolized hope gradually became the subject of growing concern. And behind many of those concerns stood a familiar name, Camilla. At first, much of the public knew very little about her. That would not last, because the quiet relationship that had once existed largely out of public view was about to become one of the biggest royal controversies of the modern age. And when it did, it would not only reshape the lives of Charles, Diana, and Camilla, it would test the monarchy itself and place Queen Elizabeth in one of the most difficult positions of her reign. The 1980s gave the world a royal fairy tale. By the early 1990s, that fairy tale was beginning to unravel in public. What had once been whispered quietly among royal insiders was now finding its way onto newspaper front pages. Every new headline seemed to reveal another crack in the House of Windsor. And with each revelation, public fascination grew. The turning point came gradually, then all at once. Reports of difficulties in Charles and Diana's marriage had circulated for years, but the atmosphere changed when private matters became public. Books were published, interviews were given, leaked recordings shocked the nation. Suddenly, the British public was not simply observing a royal marriage. They were witnessing its collapse in real time. No moment captured this better than Diana's now famous television interview in the mid-1990s. Sitting before millions of viewers, she spoke with remarkable candor about the pressures of royal life and the struggles within her marriage. Then came the line that would echo through history. There were 3 of us in this marriage. In a single sentence, Diana gave voice to what many had long suspected. The impact was immediate. Public sympathy overwhelmingly shifted toward Diana. She had already become one of the most beloved figures in the world. Her work with charities, her warmth with children, and her willingness to connect directly with ordinary people had earned deep affection. To many, she was not just a princess. She was the people's princess long before that phrase became immortalized. Camilla, meanwhile, found herself cast in a very different role. Fairly or unfairly, public perception hardened against her. Newspapers portrayed her as the woman at the center of royal heartbreak. Cartoonists mocked her. Commentators criticized her. For years, her public image remained one of the most difficult in modern royal history. And through it all stood Queen Elizabeth. One of the Queen's greatest strengths was her discipline. Throughout her reign, she rarely revealed her private emotions. Even during moments of crisis, she believed the monarchy should project steadiness and continuity. The institution, in her view, was larger than any individual. Personal feelings mattered, but duty mattered more. This created a challenge unlike any the monarchy had faced in decades. On one side stood the future king and the woman he had loved for years. On the other stood public opinion, royal tradition, and a deeply popular Princess of Wales. Every decision carried consequences. Every step was watched by the world. Then came the tragedy that changed everything. In the summer of 1997, Diana died in Paris following a car crash. News of her death spread rapidly across the globe. The reaction was unlike anything modern Britain had seen. Crowds gathered outside royal residences. Flowers covered the gates of Kensington Palace. People wept openly in the streets. The grief was immediate and overwhelming. The monarchy suddenly faced one of the greatest crises of Queen Elizabeth's reign. Public emotions were running high, and expectations shifted almost by the hour. The royal family had to navigate grief while also responding to a nation in mourning. It was a delicate moment, one that would leave a lasting mark on the institution. For Camilla, the years that followed were especially difficult. Any discussion of her future role remained highly sensitive. The memory of Diana was still powerful, and public attitudes had not softened. The idea that Camilla might one day become queen seemed unimaginable to many people. In fact, there were royal observers who believed such a future would never happen under any circumstances. Yet, history has a curious way of moving in directions few expect. The monarchy survives because it adapts, even when change comes slowly. Behind palace walls, attitudes can evolve over years rather than months. And while public debates continued outside, a quiet transformation had already begun inside the royal household. At the time, few recognized it. Fewer still understood where it might lead. But the woman many believed would forever remain on the outside was gradually moving closer to the center of royal life. The question was no longer whether Camilla would remain beside Charles. A different question was beginning to emerge. Could the monarchy eventually accept her? And if it could, how far was Queen Elizabeth prepared to let that acceptance go? The slow reinvention of Camilla Parker Bowles. By the time Charles and Camilla married in 2005, the mood surrounding them had changed, though not completely. The anger that had defined the 1990s had softened in some quarters, but public opinion remained deeply divided. For many people, Camilla was still linked to one of the most painful chapters in royal history. The palace knew this. Charles knew it. And perhaps no one understood it better than Queen Elizabeth herself. That is why the wedding was handled with extraordinary care. There was no grand state occasion and no attempt to recreate the spectacle of earlier royal weddings. Instead, Charles and Camilla married in a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall before attending a religious blessing at St. George's Chapel. The contrast with the wedding of Charles and Diana decades earlier could not have been greater. This ceremony was quieter, more restrained, and perhaps more realistic. It reflected a couple who had already endured years of scrutiny and seemed less interested in fairy tales than in stability. Even the Queen's role that day attracted attention. Queen Elizabeth did not attend the civil ceremony itself, though she was present at the blessing service and later hosted a reception. Royal commentators debated the significance of her decision for years. Some argued that constitutional considerations guided her choice. Others believed it reflected the complicated path that had led to this moment. As was often the case with the Queen, her actions left room for interpretation while her personal thoughts remained private. Another decision carried even greater symbolic weight. Upon marrying Charles, Camilla became entitled to use the title Princess of Wales. Yet she never used it publicly. Instead, she adopted the title Duchess of Cornwall. The reason was widely understood. The title Princess of Wales remained inseparable from Diana in the minds of millions. Even years after Diana's death, her presence still lingered over the royal family. By avoiding the title, the palace appeared to recognize that some royal symbols carried emotional weight beyond law or tradition. At the same time, another announcement quietly shaped expectations for the future. Official communications surrounding the marriage stated that when Charles eventually became king, Camilla would be known as Princess Consort rather than Queen. The distinction mattered. Under long-standing royal custom, the wife of a king is usually Queen Consort. Yet these circumstances were unlike any in recent memory. The title Princess Consort seemed to offer a middle ground between royal tradition and public feeling. For years, many people assumed the matter had been settled. The phrase entered royal discussions and newspaper coverage so frequently that it began to feel permanent. Royal watchers repeated it. Commentators analyzed it. The public grew accustomed to the idea that Camilla's future position had already been decided. In many ways, it reflected the lingering sensitivity surrounding Diana's legacy and the monarchy's desire to move carefully. But royal history rarely remains fixed. As the years passed, something unexpected happened. Camilla's public image began to evolve, not dramatically and not overnight, but gradually. She increased her public engagements and quietly built a portfolio of charitable work. Causes related to literacy, domestic abuse awareness, and health became central to her role. Unlike some members of the royal family, she rarely sought attention for herself. Instead, she developed a reputation for reliability and consistency. The change was subtle but noticeable. Public hostility did not disappear entirely, yet the intensity that had once surrounded her began to ease. New generations viewed the story differently from those who had lived through the royal crises of the 1990s. Time had not erased the past, but it had altered how some people understood it. Throughout those years, Charles remained steadfast. Despite decades of controversy and criticism, their relationship endured. To supporters, that endurance suggested loyalty. To critics, it remained a reminder of painful history. Either way, one fact became increasingly difficult to ignore. Camilla was no longer a temporary figure on the royal stage. She had become an established and working member of the royal family, yet a question continued to hover over the monarchy. If Camilla had long been expected to become princess consort, what changed? When did the future begin to shift? The answer would emerge years later, not through rumor or speculation, but through the words of Queen Elizabeth herself. And when those words finally came, they surprised even seasoned royal observers. Because titles matter in royal life. But, as the world would soon discover, crowns matter even more. The surprise message that changed everything. When Queen Elizabeth marked the 70th anniversary of her accession to the throne in early 2022, most people expected a message of gratitude and reflection. After all, the Platinum Jubilee was a historic milestone. It celebrated 7 decades of service from a monarch who had become a symbol of continuity in a rapidly changing world. But hidden within that carefully worded statement was a declaration that immediately changed the future of the monarchy. The Queen's message was brief, yet its impact was enormous. In it, she expressed her sincere wish that when Charles became king, Camilla would be known as Queen Consort as she continued her loyal service. Those words traveled across Britain and far beyond within hours. Royal commentators analyzed every phrase. Newspapers rushed to update headlines. For years, many had assumed Camilla would one day be princess consort. Suddenly, that expectation had been overturned by the only person whose opinion truly carried constitutional and symbolic authority. The significance of the statement cannot be overstated. Queen Elizabeth was famously careful with language. Throughout her reign, she chose her words sparingly and with precision. She rarely made personal interventions in public debates, especially on matters concerning the future of the monarchy. That is precisely why her message carried such weight. It was not viewed as a casual remark. It was seen as guidance from the sovereign herself. For Charles, the statement marked a deeply important moment. Those who had followed the royal family for decades knew how long and complicated the road had been. Camilla had gone from being one of the most controversial figures in royal life to receiving public support from the monarch. The transformation was extraordinary. It also reflected how much both the monarchy and public attitudes had changed over time. Yet even after the announcement, questions remained. Did the Queen's endorsement represent full approval of every aspect of Camilla's future role? Or was it a practical decision intended to ensure a smooth transition for the next reign? As always with Queen Elizabeth, certainty remained elusive. She rarely explained her private thinking, and perhaps that mystery was part of her strength. The monarchy often survives not by revealing everything, but by allowing history to interpret what was left unsaid. One detail in particular attracted little attention at first. The Queen had expressed support for the title of Queen Consort, but she said nothing about a crown. That distinction may seem minor to casual observers, yet in royal tradition, it matters greatly. A title defines status. A crown tells a story. Every royal crown carries memories of those who wore it before, along with the values and eras they represented. Choosing one crown over another is never merely a matter of ceremony or appearance. And when preparations for the coronation began, after Queen Elizabeth's death later that year, attention slowly shifted from titles to jewels. It was then that royal watchers realized the next debate would not center on what Camilla would be called. It would center on what she would wear. Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee message in early 2022 transformed Camilla's future overnight. For years, royal watchers had assumed that when Charles became king, Camilla would be known as Princess Consort. Instead, the Queen publicly expressed her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort. Coming from a monarch who rarely revealed personal views, the statement carried enormous weight. The announcement settled one debate, but quietly opened another. For decades, discussions about Camilla had focused on titles and public acceptance. Now that question seemed resolved. After Queen Elizabeth's death later that year, Charles became king, and Camilla immediately became Queen Consort. The transition happened far more smoothly than many had predicted during the turbulent years of the 1990s. Yet, as preparations for the coronation began, attention started shifting away from titles and towards symbolism. Becoming Queen Consort was one thing. Being crowned before the world was something else entirely. Coronations are built on history, tradition, and powerful imagery. Every detail carries meaning. And that is when royal observers began asking a new question. Not whether Camilla would be crowned, but what crown she would wear when that moment finally arrived. The crown, at the center of the debate. By early 2023, the question that had defined Camilla's story for decades had already been answered. She would be Queen Consort. Queen Elizabeth had said so herself, in writing, in her Platinum Jubilee message the year before. That debate, the one that had consumed royal commentary since the 1990s, was effectively closed. But coronations don't run on titles alone. They run on objects. And as the palace's preparations moved from paperwork into ceremony, attention shifted toward a much narrower question. Not whether Camilla would be crowned, but what exactly would be placed on her head when that moment came. For most people, a crown is simply spectacular jewelry. Inside the institution, it's something closer to a document. Every crown in the royal collection carries a name, a reign, a specific history attached to the person who wore it first. Choosing one isn't like picking a tiara out of a drawer. It's choosing which story you want your coronation to be quietly attached to. The palace had options. A new crown could be commissioned, the way new pieces sometimes are for major royal occasions. Or an existing crown could be brought out of storage and adapted. When Buckingham Palace finally confirmed its decision, the announcement was almost understated compared to the speculation that preceded it. Camilla would wear Queen Mary's crown. The crown had been made in the early 20th century for Queen Mary's own coronation. It had sat largely out of public view for decades since, occasionally displayed, never reused for a coronation of this scale. The palace's official explanation leaned on practicality. Reusing an existing crown, rather than commissioning a new one, was framed as a nod to modern sensibility. A smaller, more sustainable gesture for a modern monarchy trying to read the room of a country navigating its own economic pressures. That explanation was true. It was also, by most accounts, incomplete. Queen Mary herself isn't a neutral figure in royal history. She was a consort who shaped the institution during one of its more turbulent stretches, steady through the abdication crisis, influential in ways that extended well past ceremonial duty. Selecting her crown specifically, rather than any other available piece, tied Camilla's coronation to a specific kind of consort, not a decorative figure standing beside a king, a working one with real institutional weight behind her. Whether that connection was intentional messaging or simply the most practical option available is something the palace never fully clarified. Royal announcements rarely explain themselves that directly, but commentators noticed the symbolism almost immediately. And once noticed, it didn't go away. The crown itself wasn't used exactly as it had been worn a century earlier. Ahead of the ceremony, several diamonds connected to Queen Elizabeth's own jewelry collection were set into the design. This detail mattered more than its size suggested. It created a direct, visible thread between the late Queen's reign and the one beginning under her son. Stones that had belonged to Elizabeth, now sitting in the crown worn by the woman Elizabeth had publicly asked the country to accept. Read one way, it's continuity. A literal piece of the previous reign carried forward into the next, worn by the person the outgoing monarch had vouched for in her own words. Read another way, it's something closer to an inherited blessing, physical proof that whatever ambivalence had once surrounded Camilla, the late Queen's own jewels were now part of her crown. Both readings circulated. Neither fully displaced the other. The detail that drew the most attention, though, wasn't what was added to the crown. It was what stayed out of it. The Koh-i-Noor diamond is one of the most famous and most contested gemstones in the world. Its history stretches across multiple empires and centuries, and its presence in the British crown jewels has been a source of international dispute for generations, particularly with India, where many consider it to have been taken under circumstances that shouldn't be quietly celebrated at a modern coronation. The diamond had been associated with the Queen Mother's crown for decades. Speculation had circulated for months that it might appear in Camilla's crown as well, given the connection. When the final design was revealed, it wasn't there. The palace never issued a dramatic statement explaining the omission. It simply wasn't included, and the absence did the explaining on its own. Avoiding the Koh-i-Noor meant avoiding weeks of diplomatic headlines that would have had nothing to do with Camilla personally and everything to do with a centuries-old colonial dispute nobody wanted reopened in the middle of a coronation broadcast. It's worth being precise here about something that gets blurred in retellings. This decision was made after Queen Elizabeth's death by the institution preparing for Charles's coronation, not by Elizabeth herself. She never weighed in on what Camilla's crown would specifically contain, only on what Camilla would be called. The crown itself, every modification, every omission, was a choice made in the months following her death by people working from her stated wish but filling in every detail she'd left unaddressed. That distinction matters more than it might seem. Elizabeth had settled the title. She had not settled the symbolism. And symbolism, as the palace was about to discover, doesn't settle itself quietly. The announcement landed exactly the way most royal jewelry stories land, quietly at first, then considerably less quietly once people had a few days to actually think about it. The initial coverage was largely descriptive. Newspapers ran the basic facts. Queen Mary's crown, the added diamonds from Elizabeth's collection, the Koh-i-Noor's absence. For roughly 48 hours, the story read like a piece of ceremonial trivia, interesting to royal watchers, unremarkable to most everyone else. Then the commentary started catching up to the symbolism, and the conversation shifted noticeably. The first wave of criticism centered on the Queen Mary connection itself, though not for the reason the palace might have anticipated. It wasn't really about Queen Mary's reign, it was about reuse, full stop, regardless of whose crown it had originally been. A segment of commentary argued that recycling an existing crown, whatever the sustainability framing, read as a quiet signal about Camilla's standing relative to previous consorts who had been given newly commissioned pieces. Was this thoughtful modernization, or was it a tactful way of avoiding the expense and attention a brand new crown would have invited for a consort some of the public still hadn't fully embraced? That question didn't have a clean answer, and the ambiguity itself became part of the story. Royal historians push back on the framing, pointing out that reusing historic pieces is itself a long royal tradition, not a slight. Critics weren't entirely convinced. The debate ran for days across opinion pages and broadcast panels, never quite resolving, simply circling. The second wave, considerably louder, focused on the diamonds taken from Elizabeth's own collection. Here, the criticism came from an angle the palace likely hadn't fully prepared for. Rather than reading the gesture as continuity, a number of commentators, along with members of the public, weighing in across radio call-in segments and television vox pops, described it as uncomfortable. Some specifically objected to the idea of stones connected so directly to Elizabeth, a monarch many still associated closely with Diana's era and its aftermath, being repurposed for Camilla's coronation specifically. It wasn't a universal reaction. Plenty of commentary treated the diamonds exactly as the palace intended, a literal moving symbol of one reign passing into the next. But the discomfort was real enough, and loud enough, that royal correspondents spent considerable airtime debating what the gesture actually meant, rather than simply reporting that it had happened. The Koh-i-Noor omission produced a different kind of reaction entirely, one less about Camilla specifically, and more about what the absence revealed regarding the institution's own anxiety. International commentary, particularly from outlets covering the story from outside Britain, noted that leaving the diamond out wasn't really a gesture of reconciliation. It was an avoidance strategy, a calculated decision to sidestep a fight rather than have one. That framing didn't generate the same emotional intensity as the Diana-adjacent commentary, but it added a layer of skepticism to how the entire crown was being read. If the palace was willing to quietly omit one controversial element to avoid bad headlines, what did that say about how carefully every other choice had been managed for optics rather than meaning? Underneath all of this ran the steadier, more persistent current that had never fully gone away since the 1990s. For a meaningful portion of the public, no crown, no diamond placement, no careful statement about sustainability was going to change the basic emotional math. Diana remained, for many people, the Princess of Wales in a way that no formal title transfer could undo. Polling conducted around the coronation period consistently showed a public still split, not hostile exactly, but unconvinced, willing to accept the institutional reality of Camilla's new role while withholding the warmth that had been extended so freely and so quickly to Diana decades earlier. Royal commentators who had covered the family since the 1980s described the mood as something distinct from outright backlash. Not protest, not boycott. Something quieter and arguably more telling. A kind of polite, watchful ambivalence. People tuned in, people watched the ceremony. Far fewer people, by most informal measures, treated it with the same unguarded enthusiasm that had surrounded previous coronations and royal weddings. The palace, for its part, said almost nothing in direct response to any of this. There was no clarifying statement about the diamonds, no rebuttal to the Koh-i-Noor criticism, no acknowledgement that the Queen Mary's crown choice had become a genuine talking point rather than a footnote. Buckingham Palace's communication strategy, consistent with decades of precedent, was to let the ceremony itself answer questions that statements couldn't resolve cleanly. That strategy meant the criticism never fully died down before Coronation Day arrived. It simply ran alongside the preparations, a low, steady hum of debate that gave the eventual ceremony considerably more tension than a purely celebratory event would have carried. By the time Camilla actually walked into Westminster Abbey, the crown on its velvet cushion wasn't simply a ceremonial object anymore. It had already become a small, contested piece of the larger argument about what her coronation was actually supposed to mean. A coronation that rewrote history. On the 6th of May, 2023, Westminster Abbey opened its doors for a coronation Britain hadn't seen in 70 years. The last time a monarch had been crowned within those walls, Camilla wasn't a controversial figure in waiting. She was a child. The distance between that coronation and this one measured an entire era of change, not just in the monarchy, but in the country surrounding it. The ceremony itself followed forms that have barely shifted in centuries. The anointing, the presentation of the regalia, the ancient oaths, spoken in language largely unchanged since coronations were first formalized in this exact building. Millions watched from outside Britain entirely, a global audience tuning into something deliberately built to look unchanged, timeless, immune to the noise of the preceding weeks. And then came the moment the preceding weeks had been building toward without anyone saying so directly. Camilla, seated, was crowned with Queen Mary's crown, the late Queen's diamonds catching the light exactly where they'd been set months earlier. The Koh-i-Noor's absence noted by exactly the people who'd been tracking its absence all along, and unnoticed by almost everyone else simply enjoying the spectacle. For a few seconds, the controversy that had run through commentary pages for weeks simply wasn't visible. What was visible was a 65-year-old woman who had spent the better part of 3 decades as one of the most publicly criticized figures in the country, sitting in Westminster Abbey, wearing a crown connected to the institution's most enduring symbols. Reaction in the room and reaction watching from outside it split roughly the way the preceding weeks had predicted. Supporters described the moment as genuinely moving, evidence that loyalty, patience, and decades of quiet, consistent public service had finally been recognized at the highest level the institution could offer. Several commentators specifically pointed to Camilla's charitable work over the preceding 20 years, the literacy campaigns, the domestic abuse advocacy, the causes she'd built without the same media appetite that surrounded more visible royals, as the real substance behind the ceremony, regardless of how the crown itself had been debated. Critics weren't moved by the same framing. For them, the ceremony, however beautifully executed, didn't resolve the underlying tension. It simply formalized it. Diana's absence from that room was its own kind of presence, noted in nearly every piece of commentary published that week, whether the writer supported Camilla's coronation or not. Nobody pretended the moment existed in a vacuum, and the crown's careful, contested symbolism meant the ceremony couldn't fully escape the debate that had surrounded it, even at its most solemn. What both sides agreed on, regardless of where their sympathies landed, was the scale of what had actually happened. A woman whose royal future had once seemed, by the admission of nearly every royal historian covering this story, genuinely impossible during the depths of the 1990s, had just been formally crowned inside Westminster Abbey, with diamonds from the late Queen's own collection set into a crown specifically chosen to connect her to a respected predecessor. That fact didn't require interpretation. It simply was what it was. Whatever anyone believed about how it happened or what it meant, the coronation itself was now part of the permanent historical record, the same way Diana's wedding and Elizabeth's own coronation were part of that record decades earlier. As the procession left the Abbey and moved through London's streets, past crowds that were large but By several independent comparisons, noticeably smaller and quieter than the crowds that had gathered for previous major royal occasions, the practical reality of the moment had already settled in. The debate over the crown, the diamonds, the omitted diamond, all of it would continue circulating in commentary and retrospectives for years. But the ceremony itself was finished. The crown had been worn. History, whatever anyone made of it, had already recorded what happened. History's most unlikely Queen Royal history offers very few stories with a turn this sharp. A woman widely blamed, fairly or not, for the breakdown of the most watched marriage of the 20th century, standing 3 decades later in Westminster Abbey, crowned with diamonds that once belonged to the monarch who had quietly, deliberately asked the country to accept her. That arc didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen quickly. It happened through 3 decades of steady, largely unglamorous public service. Decades during which Camilla rarely sought the spotlight and rarely got the benefit of the doubt either. Public opinion didn't soften because of any single moment. It softened gradually, the way most long-held resentments eventually do, worn down less by argument than by time and consistency. Queen Elizabeth's role in that softening is the part of this story that remains genuinely unresolved, and probably always will. Her Platinum Jubilee statement was unambiguous about the title. It said nothing about her private feelings, her personal history with Camilla, or whether the woman she'd publicly endorsed as Queen Consort was the same woman she might have imagined occupying that role decades earlier, back when the very idea would have seemed unthinkable to almost everyone watching, including, quite possibly, Elizabeth herself. That's not a gap in the historical record that further research is likely to close. Elizabeth was famously disciplined about keeping her private judgments private, even from the people closest to her. She left behind decisions, not explanations. The Jubilee message is a decision. It tells us what she wanted to happen. It doesn't tell us whether the crown, the diamonds, the omitted Koh-i-Noor, or the specific shape this coronation eventually took, matched anything she'd actually pictured. What can be said with more confidence is this: the institution itself treated her statement as settled guidance and built everything that followed. The crown choice, the jewelry, the entire framing of the ceremony around fulfilling the spirit of what she'd asked for. Even while making dozens of decisions she never lived to weigh in on personally. That's the strange position Camilla occupies in royal history now. Crowned under instructions her predecessor gave but never fully detailed. Wearing diamonds that belong to a woman who publicly vouched for her but privately remains, and likely will remain, something of a mystery on this specific question. For supporters, that ambiguity doesn't diminish the coronation. If anything, it reinforces the idea that Elizabeth trusted the institution and trusted Charles to handle the details appropriately once she was no longer there to manage them herself. For critics, the same ambiguity leaves room for exactly the doubt that's followed Camilla since the 1970s. That whatever formal acceptance the monarchy extended, it was never quite the same as full, unreserved public embrace. The crown was real. The coronation happened. The title was settled in writing by Elizabeth's own hand months before her death. Everything else, every diamond, every symbolic gesture, every careful omission was built afterward by people working from her wishes but filling in the rest of the picture themselves. Whether that finished picture matches what Elizabeth actually imagined decades earlier when a young prince first fell for the wrong woman at the wrong time is a question the historical record simply doesn't answer. It probably never will, and perhaps that's fitting for a reign defined, more than almost anything else, by restraint, and by a woman who understood, better than most, that some of the most important things a monarch can do are the things she chooses never to fully explain.